Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I have two guests with me. I have Amit Kutumbale, who is the Director of Engineering at Steel King, and I have John Schmidt, who is the CEO over at Rack Builders as well. And if you haven't guessed yet, we're going to talk about some racking today. So this is part of a series with MHI and industry groups, and today's industry group is RMI, which is all about racking and racking manufacturers. And they're going to tell us a little bit about RMI, what RMI is all about, and they've been around for quite some time. So we're going to hear a little bit too about some of the history of racking and how racking has kind of evolved over time, and we'll dive into some of the standards around racking as well, and also looking into the future of what might be the future of racking, maybe what racking looks like in a few years from now, and how things are evolving around that. So Amit and John, welcome to the show. How are you both?
Great, Kevin. Thanks for having me on today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Definitely happy to get you both on here. I think racking is kind of a cornerstone of the warehousing world. We kind of can't live without it in a sense in many cases. So very interested in diving into this topic. So I think first let's start off with kind of giving an explanation of what is RMI and what that industry group is all about within MHI. So John, why don't you kind of kick us off there and tell us all the details?
Sure. So the RMI stands for the Rack Manufacturers Institute. It's a trade group that was actually formed in 1958, and it's grown over the years. Currently, we have 40 members. It's the majority of those are rack manufacturers. There's also manufacturers of storage rack decking, and there are rack repair companies that are associate members of the group. It's a worldwide organization. Most of our growth, or quite a bit of our growth over the past few years, has come from Asia and Europe.
Mm.
And uh, we had one new member this year, and we're already looking. We've received applications for two new members next year.
Oh, nice, nice. So worldwide, and I think that's important too because there's a lot of different things going on there, and imports and stuff as well around racking into the United States and other countries too. But the one thing I thought was interesting when I was doing some research around the industry groups and learning a little more on my own was RMI has been around for a pretty long time. Actually, I was a little surprised to see that. So I guess tell us a little bit about some of the history of RMI and how it's kind of played a part within the industry over all these years.
Sure. Well, I think the focus of RMI has always been on safety of racking.
Mm,
That's actually our mission statement to ensure that all racket systems are safe and effective. And so primarily the growth, I think, has been in the codes and standards and the RMI specification. As I'd said, the group was started in 1958, and they published their first guideline specification in 1964.
mm,
And that has evolved over the years. It became an ANSI spec in 1974, and now we are at the uh, 2021 specification or standard, excuse me, and ANSI standard.
mm. Very interesting, and obviously a long history there. And I think interesting too to see that back then there was some I guess foresight to come up with this group and put these standards together, which as you said is at the foundation and the core of it is to make sure that there's safe racking in place. And I think that it's super important to understand that because racking that's unsafe in a sense could be pretty catastrophic from any perspective. So I imagine as these standards started to come into play, certainly, it probably changed the way manufacturers start to manufacture some things and the way maybe racking looked or was built or assembled. So tell us a little bit about kind of since 1958. And I don't know if I know I wasn't around in 1958 for racking, but I don't know if you guys were. But I mean, how do we understand that racking has evolved kind of since 1958 and kind of the start of these
Thanks, Kevin.
standards around
Yeah,
that
thanks
time?
for having me.
I've been around for a while, but I wasn't around in 1958 either. I'll let you speak to that.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think racking in general, has evolved in tandem with as, structural engineering has evolved, in the beginning, considering, just shelving, wooden shelving, built from wood, that, transitioned over to metal, as people were looking to store, use racking for more dense storage. More safer solutions as you want to store higher loads, denser storage, more efficient, more accessible. So that's how the rack standards evolved over the years to keep up with the building standards, because at the end the racking is part of the building. Sometimes they are integrated. Right? You can have rack supported buildings. So as the structural engineering standards evolve for designing buildings, kind of racking industry kind of followed to keep up with those standards and codes and standards as you may speak for buildings, basically.
The other thing that's really pushed the industry, the evolution of the industry, is the uh, evolution of the lift equipment. Uh, when I started in the industry, 20-foot high rack was pretty common. Now, uh, even conventional forklifts can lift up. Buildings are 50 feet high; they can lift 40, 50 feet. Uh, you know, uh, High rise ASRS buildings are now 130 feet. So the ability to lift that product higher and store it higher has forced the rack manufacturers to evolve too.
Which is, yeah, interesting, because when I tell people, I work in racking or rack design, people think of maybe like two shelves, two levels of shelving. But sometimes people don't realize that it's not just rack that interacts with humans through forklifts. Like John mentioned, you could have ASRS, automated racks, where you could have cranes loading and unloading product from the rack, so they could go as high as 100 feet tall.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing to think, from even like a structural perspective, right? Of what goes into that, and yeah, you're right. I mean, I think the average person. I mean, the average person that's not in the industry, even like if you said like rack to them, they would probably be like, "Oh, what's rack?" Right? And you could say like, "Oh, like shelves," right? Basically, like, "Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, I got some of those in my garage," right? Maybe. But there's much more to it in that sense. And you think about, John, you mentioned the lift trucks and the heights that they're able to go to now, but then even the amount of weight that is being put on these racks and what they need to support is pretty amazing if you think about that overall. And obviously all of that kind of lends itself to what you mentioned earlier around the safety aspects, right? I mean, the more weight you put on that rack, the stronger it needs to be able to hold that. The more lift trucks you get around racking to as well, the risk gets a little higher in terms of damage or potential accidents. So I guess tell us a little bit about the standards themselves, right? And how are these standards? I guess how have they been historically been developed, and why are they really important to the industry overall?
So at the end, any standard, the primary objective of any standard is to ensure safety. That the any structure like racking, that when it's in use, it can sustain the load safely, and can keep the people who interact with the structure safe. So when we speak of racking per se, it's not just the weight of the product. You have to design a rack, to withstand earthquakes. You have to consider, seismic. Even though the rack may be indoors inside a building, you still have to consider seismic forces. If there's an earthquake, the rack needs to sustain and not collapse during a earthquake event. If the rack is outdoors, you need to consider snow loads, you need to consider wind loads. So the objective of these codes and standard is to just provide a guideline for designing the rack to meet the seismic requirements, snow requirements, wind requirements, and just provide a general benchmarking that any rack that's out there meets a certain minimum standard of safety when it's designed.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm curious too. I mean, how do you see, because you're mentioning like a lot of different things there, and like a lot of different applications for racking, even like, outside, as you mentioned, thinking about wind, or, if you're in somewhere like California, for example, earthquakes, right, are more top of mind there, and you have to consider all of that. So, I mean, how do you see sometimes where, maybe both of you, I mean, in your career at some point, I mean, have you seen where there's been like kind of a new use case in a sense where you've had to kind of look at it and say like, oh, maybe standards are not covering this and we need to add this or adjust this or think about this in a different way? Are there any interesting examples there?
Yeah, I think that this most recent edition of our standard, which is now the ANSI standard, is I don't know if it's quite a quantum leap, but it's a big leap forward in seismic loads, dynamic loads. If Amit could elaborate on that a bit.
Yeah, yeah. So the latest standard is a kind of a big switch from the last one in terms of the method of engineering rack for, like John mentioned, seismic, because I won't go into too technical details, but when you store a rack and it starts deflecting, then you have second order effects, and then the seismic, if there's a seismic event, that makes the rack deflect even more. So, and the new method of analysis called direct analysis. So, all in all, it's just a more accurate way of designing the rack, that you're not over designing, yet you are considering all the deflections for a seismic event or otherwise, to consider second order effect. So until now, it was more of a traditional method for designing the rack, and the building industry had already switched in the last 10-15 years to the new method, which I mentioned, direct analysis. That's what it's called. So this new standard for racking now conforms to the new method of calculation, direct analysis. So going forward, any rack that's designed needs to meet this new standard, which is more safer and, but more importantly, more accurate way of doing structural engineering, if I can put it in those simpler terms. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's interesting to hear that because, you think we see, well, I mean, as we're recording this, right, we were supposed to be in Florida and there's a hurricane, so we couldn't be there, right? So, I mean, we see more of these kind of like natural occurring events and things like that. And as we try to do more with our warehouses and things as well, and just structures in general, it's like we need to take more of that into account. So it's interesting to hear how that's been considered and brought into the standards and then been adopted overall. And I think that makes total sense, especially from a structure perspective and a safety perspective overall. So with the standards, you also have certifications, right, for manufacturers. So tell us a little bit about those certifications. What does a manufacturer or a person being, or a company being certified, need to do to meet that criteria? And I guess ultimately, what does that certification mean for the end user, the customer that's going to put that racking in their building?
Yeah, so the RMI, we have a certification or a license that it's called the R Mark. It was first established in 1999, and we just last year went through a process of updating it, much like it really was driven by that new specification or the new standard that the 21 standard. Uh, the 99 R mark just didn't uh, measure up, so we overhauled the requirements to receive the R mark, and all of the holders of that previous R mark had to recertify.
Mm,
So currently, we have 25 um, holders of the R mark. Most of those are members of RMI, but you don't have to be a member of RMI to have the R mark. Uh, we want, whether or not you're part of the organization, we want safe rack, and we want safe warehouses, and we want manufacturers to provide um, the right kind of structure. So in order to receive the R mark, uh, there's a certain set of criteria that a company has to demonstrate that they are capable of designing uh, and manufacturing the rack to the standard. And then we also extended the, to a RMARC certified installation, so that
mm.
a customer or an end user knows that the installations that they're receiving meets all of the requirements of the standard.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's such a great thing to do, especially to give that visibility. And, as you mentioned, it's important to, I think, to highlight that it's not just about members of RMI, right? It's about just, making the warehousing industry and community as a whole, safer overall. Because at the end of the day, I mean, the people that are really making that warehousing happen are the people that are probably standing next to that rack every day in some way or some shape or form, right? And potentially being put in harm's way if it's not safe for them, right? So I think that's a really great thing. Yeah.
To add, for an end user, I guess it's more of an assurance of minimum level of, quality. Like,
Mm,
if you go buy meat at the supermarket, you might be more inclined to buy, meat on the label that says USDA approved or something like that. So at the end,
mm,
the user knows that, it has been vetted by the RMI or the MHI to, meet the minimum standard of, design in terms of engineering, to meet the codes and standards in terms of manufacturing, the quality of manufacturing, the welding, the, tolerances and all that. And then at the end, like John mentioned, also now the installation, that, it was installed properly.
mm.
All the bolts and are properly torqued and tightened, and so on. So at the end, it's just a overall kind of assurance of minimum level of quality that you would expect to have from a, safe rack.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the manufacturer and then also the installation there as well. So does because sometimes the installer is not necessarily the manufacturer, right, of the racking. So does that R mark cover both manufacturer and installer as well?
Well, the installer is typically not the manufacturer. Typically, a manufacturer would subcontract it to a professional rack installer, or a lot of times, manufacturer sells through a dealer distributor, and the dealer distributor has their own installation crew, or they'll subcontract it. But so the RMARC, if for an installation to be RMARC certified, the the manufacturer has to provide for the inspection, or inspect the installation, and certify that the rack has been installed in compliance with the uh, design and drawings that the manufacturer has provided.
Mm, gotcha. Okay. Good to know. Definitely good to know. So, yeah. So, I mean, I think it's important to understand that. I think having that kind of set of criteria, in a sense, to follow and make sure that everything is being done the proper way is the right way to go. Absolutely. So I guess in general, I mean, aside from standards and these certifications, if like right now, if an end user, someone that wants to put some racking in their building, or they're looking to maximize their storage space a little more, get denser, what should they really be kind of looking at in the current market, and what's important from like a consideration of racking type, whether it's storage type, or how it's put together, whatever the case may be. I mean, what's really important to kind of go through that assessment part to understand that yes, I'm making the right choice and the right decision for my storage type.
Sure, yeah. So I think it's always, first of all, a good idea to involve the rack manufacturer, or, if they're working through a dealer distributor, to involve them from right from the planning phase, because at times we see, rack is an afterthought, which always does not, end with the most efficient solution, involving, us or the dealer distributor from the very beginning in the planning phase just helps end user get the most bang for their buck, in terms of, density of the storage, in terms of um, you know uh, things like, is the concrete slab that they have in the facility, can it withstand the loads that, for the amount of rack storage that they are planning for. Those things are sometimes, we do this every day, so we know that these are the good questions to ask them in the first place, right? Or the fire codes, if it's a, taller rack, if it's high pile storage, then, you might have some local fire, you might have to go through permitting, you might have to consider fire protection, egress. So those things are all a good idea to, consider and involve, the rack manufacturer, the dealer distributor from the very beginning of the project, so they can, maximize safety and efficiency of the rack.
Mm, interesting. John, anything you want to add there?
No, I guess I'd just echo, talk to a professional, whether
Mm,
that's an RMI rack manufacturer or a dealer distributor, because they're going to understand the racking side of it, and they're also going to understand the customer side of it and
mm.
how those things come together.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's such a great piece of advice there because, it's not every day, right, that we may be warehouse operators, but not every day we're putting in new racking, right? So we're certainly not the experts in that sense. And I think it makes sense, like you said, to engage a professional and, give professional opinion. And I think even in that sense too, it's because we're not putting racking in every day, maybe there's some type of racking or storage solution out there that might be a better fit for our use case than we were even aware is out there, right? And I guess to that point, I'm curious, because we've seen, certainly an explosion in automation and robotics in the last few years as well. So, and you mentioned some ASRS structures and buildings out there as well, which involves racking too. I guess tell us a little bit about how have maybe some people in the industry, I mean, how have they started to look at storage options a little differently because of robotics or automation solutions, or how has that changed kind of the market a little bit, if it has changed at all?
With automation, I think, racks are becoming taller and deeper.
Mm,
That's why generally I put it, what's automation helping with is making racks taller and deeper. When you consider, a simple selective rack, it's what's it called, whether it's a single deep or two deep system. Now with automation, instead of, a forklift operator going deep into the rack system and retrieving, either loading or unloading the product, now you have automated shuttles, right? Which is called a shuttle rack. That it could be
mm,
several, pallets deep, like 60, 70, 80 pallets deep. And then instead of the person going in there, having to go in there, the shuttle can go in there and retrieve the product for you. Or it could be ASRS system, which is automated storage and retrieval systems, where you would have a crane, interacting with the rack. So that way the crane can go, 100 foot tall, where, forklifts cannot generally reach. But, on the flip side, with automation now, we that means the tolerances have to be much tighter, because now there's automated crane that's operating on a set path on a crane rail, instead of, forklift operator who could, move maybe a couple inches here or there. So the tolerances have to be much tighter now for us manufacturers. We have to make sure that, that automated system, whether it's a shuttle or crane, can interact with the rack as originally intended in the design.
interesting. Yeah. So it's a little more like precision, I guess, in a
Exactly.
sense, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't have the flexibility necessarily that a human has, I guess, so to speak. Because a robot is very like focused in, right? And John, your thoughts there?
Yeah, I was going to say, so I've been doing this for about almost 32 years, and
Mm,
automation has been around prior to that, and it's always been growing, and it's definitely accelerated in the last 5, 10 years.
mm,
Uh, but it's you have to be careful in your warehouse. It's not perfect for everyone. It's great. I mean, there's great uses for it, great opportunities for it in a lot of businesses, but it's not a magic bullet. So that's why I would say I would go back to that design professional, a rack manufacturer, a dealer distributor, and see what solution works best for uh, your particular business, and get the right kind of lift equipment, get the right kind of storage system, get the right kind of software.
mm. Interesting. Yeah. And I think that's a great point too. And making sure you have that right fit at the end of the day, I think is the thing because installing a bunch of the wrong racking is pretty costly, right? To try and redo and get the right situation. I've actually experienced that once where we had somebody like right before I got hired, they engaged a consultant and they said to put all the racking at it. And this was a new distribution center, and they said to put all the levels at this height, right? And we start to get inventory in. We go to put away like one of the top moving SKUs and it doesn't fit in the racking. We're like, what happened here? And we had to go later on and we had to have somebody come in and just move beams up. And that, move beams is like simple, but still very expensive when you have lots of locations. So very important to try and get it as right as possible from the beginning. Definitely when it comes to that because there's a big undertaking there involved with racking. So now I guess on that same kind of note, as we close out the conversation here, I mean, we're looking to the future, right? We've talked a lot about kind of the history of RMI and it has been around for a long time, and those standards are certainly solid over that time and have developed as racking has evolved over that time as well. But if we look towards kind of the future, next few years out or so, I mean, where's the industry, I guess, heading in terms of racking, and how is RMI keeping up with that and making sure that they're staying top of mind as well to be able to continue with that evolution.
We have a standing engineering committee. In fact, they're meeting tomorrow. We were supposed to meet live, but it's going to be virtual. But uh, and the engineering committee has a subcommittee called the Specification Advisory Committee. They actually met today, so they are uh, always looking at how do we improve our standards, and how do we keep up with the changing science. We do a lot of research with universities in both the United States and in Europe. We fund research for so that we can keep our standards up to date.
Mhm. Okay. And Amit, anything you want
Yeah, and I mean, obviously the standards have come a long, long way. There have been many iterations over the past decades, but still, if you compare any typical rack standard, it's about 100 pages, versus a building standard might be
to add?
1,000 or 2,000 pages. So there's still a lot of, work to do. Like John mentioned, the rack structure is similar to building structure, but still very different. So, at the end, the rack codes are kind of adopted from the building codes, but with certain, assumptions and certain riders. So there's still a lot of testing to do, to, write those details and kind of tailor them specifically for rack structures, so that the any new engineer coming into the industry might have that guidance of how this differs from a building structure, and use that to design safer rack. So that's something, obviously, to keep working on, and this is going to be kind of a work in progress, kind of continuous improvement. And then the other thing, I guess, in terms of future we lately, we have started seeing more and more big customers, talk about sustainability. How does your rack? They are always looking for us to reduce shipments. How to reduce
Mm,
shipment on a big job, how to reduce fabrication, use maybe bolted instead of welded, or so bigger customers are starting to ask those questions, and that's something also, I guess, us rack manufacturers will have to, as part of continuous improvement, keep working on, and keeping, that in mind as well.
interesting, interesting. And I'm curious. I mean, what does the you mentioned like as an example there, like bolted versus welded. I mean, what is the difference there when it comes to racking?
I think so. I mean, I come from the bridge industry. In the past, I've worked many years as a bridge engineer. So this was, and it was interesting for me because it's very similar in that sense. Like in Europe, everything is more bolted versus in the U.S., it's more welded. That's how the American in structural industry has evolved. There's in terms of strength and safety, I don't think either is inferior. Both are good. It's just a different philosophy. But yeah, that's just something, in terms of sustainability or so. Both have, I would say, it's advantages and disadvantages. But as we are moving more towards sustainability, one might have some benefits over the other depending on the context, whether it's roll form rack or structural rack, or so it might be more, I would say, customized solution in the future depending on where what your target is. And John might have something to add there. So he's been doing it for a long time.
One of the biggest challenges that we have at the RMI is uh, to really get the word out uh, about the things that we're doing, and that's one reason why we're talking today, so that to make sure that the specifications are being adhered to, that installers are putting rack systems, no matter who manufactures them, that they're putting them together correctly, and that that the systems are being used uh, correctly and safely. There's a lot of information out there, so we want to make sure that that safety is emphasized.
Mm, absolutely, yeah. And I think that's the most important thing to emphasize there, whether it's with racking or anything within the warehouse itself, and making sure that at the end of the day, those end users are leaving just the way they came in. Maybe happier in some cases, but not every day at work is the happiest. But at least all fully intact and safe going home there as well. So really appreciate you both coming on the show today and talking to me about RMI and teaching us a little bit about some of the standards that are out there around racking and what to look out for, and also what's coming in the future as well, which I think is very interesting. So if people are interested in learning more about RMI and what you're doing, maybe getting in touch so they can learn a little bit more about racking or a project they have coming up to get a little further insight on what they should be looking out for, what's the best way to do that?
Well, there is the RMI safety blog, safety website, which I believe is rmisafety.org, or you can always go to the MHI website, mhi.org, and you can find the Rack Manufacturers Institute industry group there, and you can find a lot of other industry groups there too.
Yeah, yeah, the website has a wealth of resources. Like John said, there's they frequently release blogs. There's a lot of FAQs, like questions a typical end user might have when they have a need for a rack. So the website, RMI website, has a lot of rack. It has a list of all the RMark certified companies. If someone is looking for a rack and they don't know who to reach out to, the RMI website has also the list of RMark certified companies. So the website is, in general, just a good resource when you're looking for a rack. Yeah.
All right, fantastic. And we'll definitely put that website and all the other relevant information at thenewwarehouse.com, as well as in the show notes of this episode, wherever you're listening or watching today. So, Amit and John, thank you once again for joining me on the show today.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kevin.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's video here on our YouTube channel, The New Warehouse Podcast, and I appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and if you like this video in particular, make sure you like it as well. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that you see in the video behind me, Warehouses Are Sexy, head to warehousesAreSexy.com and get your own.